Helping organizations thrive. Today I have Todd Cherches all the way from New York. Welcome, Todd.
Thank you, Julian. It's so great to be talking to you across the pond.
Absolutely. I love talking to those people across the pond. Many of you, I talk to you, so it's good to have you on today. I'm just going to tell the audience a little bit about you. So you're the CEO and co-founder of Big Blue Gumball. As a consulting firm specializing in leadership development, public speaking, and executive coaching. You're also an adjunct professor of leadership at New York University, a lecturer at Columbia University in leadership. You're also the founding partner of Global Institute for Thought Leadership. You're a TEDx speaker, and you're also the author of the book Visual Leadership, Leveraging the Power of Visual Thinking in Leadership and in Life, which I am sure we will explore later on, because I can see that visually behind you as well. A nice little bookcase of all of your books.
Yes, I have a few copies available, yes.
Which is great.
I created my own little Barnes & Noble bookstore in my office here.
I can see that, and I know you like your books. You're an avid reader, which is fantastic. But I want to ask you first, before we get into all that, is what do you love about what you do?
I love a lot about what I do. Mainly, my personal mission statement is making the world a better place, one leader at a time. And to me, everyone is a leader. So I always start with that premise. So in my workshops, in my NYU class, I'll say to my students, just for curiosity, how many people here are leaders by a show of hands? And people don't know whether to raise their hands. And I say, by the end of today's session, you're all going to be raising your hands when I ask that question, because we're going to redefine and reframe what it means to be a leader. So I think that's what makes it fun. It's like leaders are not just CEOs or VPs or whatever. They are all of us. Even if we're just leading our own lives, we need to lead in order to succeed. So that's the foundation. And what got me into this is the fact that I had earlier in my career some of the worst bosses who've ever set foot on this planet. So they taught me how not to manage and how not to lead people. And that's what kind of drove me into doing this and reading all these management leadership books, saying there's got to be a better way than tyranny and abuse. I couldn't have envisioned an entire career of having bosses like the bosses I had earlier on.
So you sounded quite unfortunate with your bosses that you had in the early days, but obviously it was not a misfortune, but a fortunate thing, because obviously it propelled you into do what you're doing now, I guess.
It really did. My book is dedicated first to my wife, secondly to my parents, and thirdly to all the horrible bosses without whom my career would not have been possible. So I acknowledge them. They've given me some of the best stories. At the time, it wasn't fun. I laugh about it now, but when you're working in a toxic environment and for abusive bosses, it's not fun at all. So, I worked in the entertainment industry. So first in advertising in New York, which was fine, but then I moved to Hollywood and I worked for Columbia Pictures, Disney, CBS, and a couple of other theme park companies. And I just had a track record, a history of having not great bosses. And again, I learned how not to manage and lead from working for them.
Excellent. That's brilliant. So I just want to just almost think back to, obviously, the last year has been really interesting for everybody. And I think if you've been a leader in an organization, it's probably been the most challenging time to try and help navigate yourself, but also your people through these uncertain times. And there's been lots of words like resilience and agility and pivoting, all those factors, which are wonderful, and people have been doing it, and some amazing things. And also, I think what's come more to the surface in leadership is that sort of empathetic leadership as well. Now, I'm a view of looking more to the future. I'm more of the optimist. And as Nancy Halpern would always say, she comes up with the problems. I sort of come up more the solution orientated. Hence, we work as a good tag team.
Yeah.
But if you're a leader now and you're looking to the future and you're looking to try and inspire, because I think people need some inspiration. And I'm not talking about any sort of political or government side. I'm talking about in organizations where you've had this real tough year. How might we go about that? But also, I guess, what are your reflections on that as well? How we go forward to try and inspire our staff and our teams in this sort of new way, whatever that may be.
Yeah. The reality that we have been in for the past year and that we're heading into is a reality none of us has ever lived in or experienced before. So I think everyone's just trying to figure it out. Some people feel like, we're just going to go back to the way things were. I say the way things were was a Barbara Streisand song. It's not, reality, right? So things are going to change. Some things are going to go back to the same. Some things are going to change for all eternity. So, or at least for the foreseeable future. So I wrote a blog post not long ago called "In a VUCA World," and VUCA stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. That's one of those phrases we all use. In a VUCA world, leaders need to do the opposite. So the opposite of volatility is calmness. So leaders need to try to calm things down, right? There's a lot of emotion, anxiety. My friends Chester Elton and Adrian Gostick just wrote a book called Anxiety at Work, which just came out. So there's a lot of anxiety. So as leaders, how can we create a sense of calm? Like just slow it down, calm it down. In terms of uncertainty, there's so much uncertainty. There's so many unknowns, but what could we be certain about, right? So that's where the certainty. So we need some solid foundation we could build on. So differentiating between what we could be certain about and what will remain uncertain for the foreseeable future. Complexity, leaders need to try to simplify things. Things are so overwhelming now and complex that if we could simplify complexity, that's one of the most valuable things that a leader can do. And in terms of ambiguity, we need some clarity, right? There's this fog of uncertainty and this fog of confusion. Anything we could do to clear things so we could see the future or see some possibilities, and like you talked about hope and optimism and empathy and compassion, we need to create a culture and a climate that is this new reality that will help people perform and to function and to focus on their work as opposed to this state of treading water that I think a lot of us have been living in for the past year.
And how do we I almost get people to lift their gaze a little bit? Because I think, people in organizations have perhaps got a little bit, not just beaten, sort of browbeaten, but also just looking down on things and being very short-termism. How do we get them to sort of lift their gaze? How do leaders get them to sort of see the bigger picture and start to create that sense of, yes, we're going to go for something now, still based in reality? I'm not saying, but how do we do that? What are the ways that you've experienced in your career, but also recently with leaders you're talking to?
Yeah. Well, I talk about this in my TED Talk, that when I throw out the word leadership and I ask my students or workshop participants, what's the first word that comes to mind? Most of them say vision or visionary. So what is a vision? It's a picture. It's a picture in our mind's eye. And Shakespeare coined the term mind's eye in Hamlet when Hamlet saw the ghost of his father and didn't know if it was an apparition or a figment of his imagination. He said, I think I see my father in my mind's eye. Leaders need to formulate a vision in their mind's eye, but then they need to articulate and communicate a clear and compelling vision of the future for the people. So that's a big part of being a visionary leader or a leadership visionary, and that's a focal point of my book, Visual Leadership. It's about how do you get people to see what you're saying. So leaders need to have a picture of the future, and then they need to inspire and motivate people and get them on board while still being empathetic and compassionate in terms of what people are experiencing and feeling at the moment. So it's not easy. Leaders have a tough task ahead of them, but I think it starts with leaders formulating their own vision, their own picture of what an idealized future state looks like that's different from and better than the current reality, and saying, this storm will pass and it may not be clear sailing, but there's a destination, there's something that we're heading towards that's motivating and inspiring for people. So I think that's a key thing that leaders can and need to be doing right now.
And it's, you said that about formulating that sort of compelling vision, which it's easily said, but also than done, isn't it? In the sense of, how do we, if I was a leader right now and you were talking to me, and how do I go about sort of getting something that's compelling? Obviously, it's got to come from me or from the organization. What are the things you've been talking to leaders about in terms of helping them get something? Because it's all very well having something in your head and then how you get it out. But if it's not very good, if it's not very compelling or inspiring, what are the factors they need to think about to make it really inspiring, but also believable, I guess, as well? That sense of, because sometimes if it's so far out there, it becomes a bit unbelief and therefore a bit delusional, doesn't it? It's that balance, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, the two things that popped into my head as you were talking, one is I always say when I teach presentation skills, and communication skills, that everyone has two thought bubbles over their heads. It's why should I care and what's in it for me, right? So when people are listening to you, they're thinking through the lens or thinking through the lens of why should I care? Why is this interesting to me? Why is this valuable to me? And then the other part is, how will this benefit from me? So even if people are not selfish or self-centered, people want to know there's got to be some payoff. There's got to be some pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, right? So as leaders, we need to connect with people. And there's one of the things we were talking about before, in a world of diversity and inclusion, belonging, equity, there's no one-size-fits-all solution for anything or anyone. So we really need to focus on individuals. We need to look at things from multiple perspectives. We need to have diverse leadership teams so we can view things from multiple lenses. So those are a few of the things to keep in mind, is that we need to also make things tangible, right? So SMART goals is one of those mantras that, when you set goals, when you have a vision, that's like a big picture, right? But you also need to have tangible metrics and goals to see, are we executing our strategy? Are we moving forward, right? So with SMART goals, you need to make them specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time focused, right? So if you have all those things in place, then you could create a plan that makes people feel, all right, we're inching forward, right? We're making progress. There's a book called The Progress Principle, which says that people are motivated by making some progress, moving forward, but also getting recognition or acknowledgement for that progress, right? So those are some of the things that leaders need to be thinking about. And it's not easy. It's not, but again, I think you make a good point. This is not some pie in the sky kind of fantasy. This is having clear a vision, a strategy that aligns with that vision, and then putting in metrics to execute that vision and achieve those goals.
And we talk about vision. Do you think it's the responsibility of perhaps the CEO of that company to come up with it, or is it something that you work in tandem with your senior team to bring people along and bring that inspiration that creates more of a vision? The reason I ask, I'm working with an organization where I'm starting to help them create more of a vision sort of statement, but I'm working with a senior team on it. I think the senior leader has a sense of an essence of that, but we're trying to build upon it. What's your experience of that? Because I think it's by bringing people in creates that connectivity, engagement, doesn't it?
Yeah, I believe that totally. One of my favorite quotes that I use in my NYU class on session 1, when we're establishing the guiding principles for our course, is the quote by Dale Carnegie, that he said that people support a world they help create, right? So if people have a say in things, if people have a sense of ownership and accountability, they're more likely to be on board and buy in to that vision than if it's the leader, one leader or the senior leadership team coming down like Moses with the tablet saying, here's our vision, right? So no, you can't necessarily put everything to a vote, but you want to get people on board, and people want to feel heard, and people want to feel valued and validated. So I think it should be a conversation. And I think, we haven't mentioned the word culture yet, right? So how, creating a culture of an organization, do you have a culture of inclusion and communication and cooperation, or is it one of hierarchy and rules set from the top? So I think that's a good point, is how do you engage people in creating the culture and the vision so that they're more likely to buy into it and feel a sense of ownership and empowerment and accountability.
And I guess then, once you've got that, it's this, how you then articulate that, how you communicate that. Because, one of the key things in any organization is, or the failings of an organization is communication. People get misinterpretations of things, they get misunderstandings, they get different perspectives or the wrong perspectives. I think that is quite key. And I work a lot with leaders on the whole communication piece, because I think it's quite vital. Certainly trying to cast a vision or even strategies or anything really is communicating effectively. Using the visual aspects of visual leadership, what are the sort of, I guess, tools or techniques they can use that would help them communicate, whether that's a vision or goals going forward?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we need to do is with visual leadership is make the abstract concrete, the intangible tangible, and the invisible visible, right? And one of the ways to do that is through the use of what I call visual leadership, which is the application of visual thinking and visual communication to the practice of management and leadership. So I break it down into 4 categories in my book. So basically, it is using visual imagery, which is pictures and or drawing, right? So literally having something that you could show someone and they could look at it and see it through their eyes. Category 2 is using models and frameworks. So any kind of mental models, we use SWOT diagrams, we use triangles or pyramids or step ladders or whatever, a way of visually, or mind maps. A company's organizational chart is a visual representation of the structure, right? So using some kind of visual framework to communicate. Category 3 is using metaphor and analogy to say this is kind of like that. So using something familiar to explain something unfamiliar. And category 4 is using storytelling with bonus points for humor if and when appropriate. So when you use those categories in combination, it's more powerful. So again, a leader, just to say, oh, didn't you get that memo, or didn't you hear me speak at the town hall, and that's it, we all know that's not going to stick, right? So how do you get ideas to stick? And one of the ways to do that is through use of visual imagery and visual language. And I break it down, and I talk about this in my TED Talk, into 3 reasons: attention, comprehension, and retention. When you use visual language or visual imagery, it captures people's attention and gets them to focus. If I show you something, you're looking at it and you're seeing it with your eyes, and we're all wired visually. That's just the way our brains are wired. So that's attention and focus. Comprehension is if you see something, you're more likely to understand it than if you just hear something, right? And thirdly, retention is you're more likely to remember something. And if you can remember it, you're more likely to use it if you can remember it, right? So for real life example, so this is the book list from my NYU leadership course. This is the same list, right? So which one is your eye drawn to? Which one are you going to remember? Which one is going to stick with you? Which one is going to make you want to buy one of those books? Most likely this one, right?
Absolutely,
so I use this as one simple example of the power. Would you buy something online on eBay or Amazon if there was no picture, just based on the description? Would you link in with someone if they didn't have a headshot, if you didn't know who they were? So like if you're reading a blog post, research has showed that more blog posts are read if there's a visual image that's captivating than if there's no image, right? So again, that's just the way our minds are wired and our brains are wired. So we're just drawn to visuals, to faces. And even if you can't draw, there's a million other ways to communicate visually. So if I'm talking about, curiosity, I may hold this guy up and say, this Curious George I keep on my desk to remind me to always be curious. Do you have Curious George over in the UK? Is he a familiar character?
Is a new one for me, Todd. Okay,
so I never know which ones cross cultural lines. What about Gumby? Do you guys have Gumby over there?
No.
Even if you don't have Gumby, we need to be flexible and we need to bend over backwards to serve our clients. So even if you've never seen this category, so again, you're not going to forget Gumby and you're not going to forget Curious George because they are visual images, they're characters, and they're fun, right? And I just used a little story. So a seashell, I'm sure you have seashells over there. My wife gave me this to remind me to slow down and talk slower at a snail's pace, which I never remember to do. So I'll throw that behind me. But I do keep it behind me to try to remind me to do that. So again, the power of visuals, right? I did a whole workshop on leading in the age of COVID, and it's like this microscopic thing has caused so much havoc in our lives, right? But what's the emotional reaction just from seeing this image? It's like, right? So again, the power of imagery is so pervasive that leaders may not be leveraging it as much as they could and they should.
And it's interesting. You did some wonderful examples there. And I think we know it's true because we're all visually seeing screens and tapping into things. And we know we're doing it. But it's that, as always, anything is a habit, and creating those positive habits and positive ways of behaviors, I should say, that to stop and think. And I guess when we're presenting information or communicating, we have to be more strategic, don't we? And it's almost thinking about our audience in the end game and what will be appropriate. I mean, you talked about your 4 models: imagery, models, metaphors, and storytelling, and looking at aspects which will be appropriate to how we communicate that, isn't it?
Yeah, you just said stop and think. And in my book actually opens with a cartoon. I'm looking to find it here. That's basically, I'll describe it visually without even showing it to you. There's a big billboard that says stop and think, and it's 2 guys standing in front of it, and one says to the other. Kind of makes you stop and think, doesn't it? So it's like, that's exactly what we have to do, right? We need to stop and we need to think. We need to think, is this the best way to get this message across? Is this clear? Is this compelling? We need to see things. I just want to mention 2 concepts from my book. One is, if you notice on the book cover, it's a rainbow colored eye. Now, no one in the world has this colored eye, so that represents the fact that no one in the world sees the world exactly as you do. And leaders need to realize that. It may be crystal clear to you, but you're looking at it from a different lens, right? So we need to realize, again, thinking diversity, inclusion, belonging, everyone's going to look at things through a different lens. So you need to be able to look at things with empathy and compassion and try to, what I call, flip the eye and see things from other people's point of view. Also, the rainbow color represents diversity, inclusion, but also creativity and innovation, in the fact that we need to use all the colors in the crayon box or in our markers. And I have this on my desk all the time when I'm teaching people to draw and to color. We need to use all the colors of the rainbow to be creative and innovative and get our ideas out there. So if we use, if you do something, how many people are still using black and white bullet point text on PowerPoint slides and then just reading off them line by line by line? It's like, PowerPoint wasn't invented to be a torture device. It was invented to be a communication tool, right? So yet, so many people are doing it. So why aren't we using more visual imagery? Why aren't we using more metaphors? Why aren't we using fewer words and more ideas? I mean, the phrase, a picture is worth 1,000 words is, is common in all cultures for a reason, right? Because it's true. Even Napoleon said a good sketch is better than a long speech. So, so pictures worth 1,000 words goes back to Confucian times. So again, if we can leverage imagery and visual language more often, we could be more effective than using words or numbers alone, as many managers and leaders do.
No, and I think that's a real good thing to do, is that stop and think and start to think about, what am I communicating, who am I communicating, and what is the best way of getting this across, this message. Just a thought and a question for you, really. How do you know your message has landed, particularly to a larger audience? What sort of things could you do to ensure that that's happened? So I was asking everybody specifically what they heard, but how would you know in that? So what ways can you, techniques that could understand that my message has been landed here, they've understood what I want?
Yeah, and when I'm teaching presentation skills, I always talk about, what do you want people, beginning with the end in mind, which is Stephen Covey's habit number 2, right? What do you want people at the end of your messaging to, whether it's an email, a conversation, or a presentation, what do you want them to think, feel, know, and most importantly, do when you're done? What is your call to action, right? So I think the true test is, one, do people understand what you're saying? Is there some kind of feedback loop that will tell you that they do understand? But I think it's really about action, right? Leaders, we're trying to turn ideas into actions and actions into results. So I think it's ultimately the results. That's the test. It's like, you can have a vision, you can have a strategy, you can put all these plans in place, but if you don't hit your target, meet your goals, or make that vision a reality, then your message may not have landed as effectively as you had hoped. So it may have been communicated beautifully, but I think the true test is in the execution. And I think that applies also to, like, working from home, which we haven't even talked about yet, but it's like, managers who want their people at their keyboard, at their desk from 9 to 5 every day and are measuring you as if you're punching a time clock. That's a different approach than leading and empowering people and saying, as long as you get these results, as long as you achieve our objectives, I don't care if you do it at midnight, 2 in the morning. I don't care if you're doing it at the beach. But just, let's agree on the goals and the objectives and let's get it done. So it's like, I think leaders need to empower people more and build trust. We haven't even mentioned the word trust yet, but do we trust people, and are we trustworthy? Our words and our actions in alignment? So I think ultimately, that's a great question that you posed, but I think it is ultimately about actions and results, right? So words are great, but they're only meaningful and impactful if you're changing the world, changing lives, and actually achieving something.
And you mentioned remote working there, and again, it's more challenging to be a bit more. I mean, you were extremely visual there with all your little sort of toys and stuff there. How, again, remotely, again, what's your advice, and what have you seen that really works with leaders when they're trying to do perhaps town hall presentations? I'm not just talking presentation sort of slides here. I'm talking other things they could do. What sort of things have you seen or have given advice about?
Yeah, I think leaders, first of all, you need to be authentic and transparent and true and clear. Like, if you're pretending as if everything's fine and normal, I think when you share with some of your own struggles with your people, that humanizes you, that makes you vulnerable. We're all in this together. One of the sayings, and I wrote down, which do I have who said? Oh, this guy Damian Barr wrote a blog post. He said we're all in the same storm, but we're not in the same boat. Because sometimes people say, "Oh, we're all in the same boat. We're all going through the same thing." We're not. We're all in the same storm, but some people are in the yacht, and other people are in a sinking rowboat, right? So I think leaders need to realize that some of their people, they may not have good Wi-Fi. They may have their kids at home. They may have pets on their lap or aging parents that they're taking care of. So I think leaders need to, with people working from home, need to be more empathetic and compassionate and understanding. I'm a big Elvis Costello fan, so I've been playing Peace, Love, and Understanding almost every single day. So it's I think that's the great theme song. It's like peace, we want to calm things down and get along and try to minimize conflict. Love, love and compassion and empathy, and understanding. We need to try to see things from other people's point of view, knowing that they're going through everyone's going through different experiences. So I think if leaders come across that way, people will trust them, they will connect with them, they will, jump through hoops for them. But I think if a leader is in an ivory tower and dictating down from on high, I think that's where you're really going to get a lot of disengaged people. And I think we were talking a little bit about this before, the fact that, I'm calling the September Shuffle, so no one can steal that title. I'm going to write that blog post. I think in September, I think people are going to try to enjoy this summer after this really stressful year. And I think in September, when people are ordered back to school, back to work, I think a lot of people are going to be like, I got used to this. I've shown I can work from home, or I don't want to commute 2 hours a day anymore, or, new opportunities may open up. So I think there's going to be a lot of even more VUCA than I think it's going to be a hyper VUCA come September, and leaders are going to need to navigate that because again, there's no playbook. With all these books on my shelf behind me, there's not one. There's a couple of new books that just came out about how do you manage and lead remote teams, but there's no playbook for what we're experiencing right now.
No, and I agree with you. And going forward, it's going to be even more difficult. People thought last year was difficult, but that was slightly forced, and we had to make those decisions. Now there's a little bit more of a flexibility going on in terms of as things open up and as people start to realize they've got a voice as well. So what would be the things to think about as a leader now if you're a leading organization and you're thinking September, and you called it the September Shuffle, and people start to coming back, and perhaps people are thinking back to the office? What are the considerations leaders should have right now?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a test of our agility and flexibility and being able to see things and not to say no so quickly and say, let's say you order people back to work, and some people they've shown they could work from home, and maybe you have them come in on Mondays and Fridays, but they could work from home Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or just, find some kind of combination that works for people. And I think that's where HR people need to be more strategic partners and to help drive this. I teach leadership and team building in the Human Resources Master's Program at NYU. And that's one of the topics was always, how do you make HR relevant in today's age, right? So HR is not just the company police or the benefits people. HR people need to step up as not only strategic partners, but strategic leaders and help the C-suite to navigate this, because it comes down to talent. Because if we start losing people that we've invested in, and they walk out the door to a competitor or decide because their working needs are not being met, they'll say, I'll work for myself or go work for a competitor. I think it's going to be a test of leaders' flexibility to kind of engage people. They still need to hit their numbers and please their stakeholders, but it's going to be more complex than ever before. But I think that's what we need to listen more. I think we haven't talked about listening yet, but empathy and compassion starts with listening. And again, flipping the eye and seeing things from other people's point of view, and finding some kind of new solutions that maybe we haven't thought about before. So like my former company, which is now my client, for years, the CEO was anti people working from home. They were such a progressive company, but he was just against it. He's, I want the water cooler conversations. I want everyone here in the office. We won't work as well. But then once we had to, they showed that they did, right? So we've proven otherwise. But what happens when you have a hybrid? You're having a meeting, and it's very easy to forget that people are at home and not include them in the meeting, or there's time zone issues and differences. So there's a lot of complexity that I think leaders need to do. So things that they could do right now is scenario planning, envisioning possibilities, planning if-then scenarios for different situations. And again, you don't have to solve all these. Ask people, right? If you say you don't have to come down with all the solutions, you could pose that question to your people and say, "Well, here's the objectives that we need to meet. Let's talk about how we could do this while still accommodating people's needs. So again, you can't always make everyone happy, but you at least have to have these conversations and go with an open mind.
No, and I agree with you. I think it's that engagement with your organization, with your employees, and having those really meaningful conversations.
Yeah.
I think for me, this next phase, or what do you want to call it, is all about this agility and being sort of flexible in how we operate. No one size fits all, and that sense of listening and working it through, and looking actually for the solutions that might not be right in front of you. Might be another way of looking at it. Is definitely. I thoroughly enjoyed my watching you with all your props. It's brilliant. You're probably the most entertaining guest I've had so far, Todd.
Oh, that's nice of you.
And quite memorable. With I didn't get all the books on that book list, but I certainly remember the one. Oh, we've got some more here.
I didn't even mention this one. The fact that we need to open our minds to new possibilities, to create space to explore the future of work, and we keep our minds closed, we're not going to be successful. So I'll close out with this prop That's
brilliant, Todd. I really appreciate that and thoroughly enjoyed it. So how can people get in touch with you, and where can people get this book, Visual Leadership?
Visual Leadership is available on Amazon all over the world and other bookstores. The best way to reach me is through LinkedIn, because I live on LinkedIn. So feel free to link in with me. Just tell me you saw me on Julian's show, and we'll connect. And also visit my website, toddcherches.com, where you can actually download a PDF of my top visual leadership books, my top 52. I'm a big business book addict, as you can tell from my library behind me. I've been reading an average of one business book a week for 22 years, since 1998. So that's over. I didn't major in math, but it's well over 1,000. So, but if you want my list of top 52 to help you be a better visual leader, in addition to my book, you can just download the PDF from my website.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Todd. Really appreciated it.
Thanks for having me, Julian. It's been great.